Hey, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sean.
This is Alex.
And you're listening to another episode of Coaster Kings Radio. Today's episode is talking about Intamin, our favorite Intamins.
There's a lot to talk about.
Then we made a list and we realized, oh wow, there's so many.
Long.
So if there are some of your favorite Intamins that are missing on this list,
we apologize.
Don't sweat
personal.
it, not that personal. Totally just trying to make this episode a decent length.
In fact, you can comment when this episode goes live.
Yeah, find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Discord,
be like, my favorite Intamin,
Twitter, and then
Green Lantern at Magic Mountain, and you didn't talk about it. We'll be like, well,
no, it was on the list once, and then we cut it off the list. But then we realized, like, are they really our favorites, or are some of these just because we kind of want to talk about them? And then we started really just eliminating some of the rides that don't really matter, like Green Lantern and Magic Mountain, which now got more screen time than some of our actual favorites.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Right, moving on.
So we'll start with some of the non-coasters. We'll dive right in.
Yeah, so it's divided into a short Intamin non-coaster segment and a longer Intamin coaster segment. Because we're here for coasters.
And based on this week's Minnesota, Coaster Kings A through Z Cup Car Chase.
Yes.
We were like, well, that's an incredible Intamin, one of the best Intamins that was ever created. Yeah. So let's now talk about more Intamins.
Yes.
So we're back with more Intamin.
That is our segue.
And we're starting with some drop towers, because when I think Intamin, I think obviously insane coasters like Skyrush and I-305 and the typical ones, but I also think about drop rides. And so early on in our conversation of like what are we going to talk about today, I was like, well, drop towers are like a big thing for me when it comes to Intamin. I think they're some of the best.
It's a good place to start because Intamin got their start building tower rides, observation towers.
Exactly.
Vertical
and
tower-based attractions.
So the ones that come to mind for me for some of our favorite drop rides. We
have to start with Movie Park Germany because
we have Highfall. Highfall, located right next to where Cup Car Chase used to be, is an Intamin Roto Tower. Is that what it's called officially? Is that just a roller coaster?
Stand-up Roto Drop.
Roto Drop, that's what it is.
There was only 2 built.
So you stand up as you take off, and then you're kind of hanging. So imagine Riddler's Revenge's seats, but then like your feet aren't touching the floor, so a little bit uncomfortable. But I didn't mind it as much. And then when you get to the top, it tilts forward about 45 degrees, and you face the ground after you do a full circle, and then you drop down.
Is it really 45 degrees?
Maybe a little bit less, maybe like 40, but it's more than...
It's very scary.
It's significantly more than the new Orlando one tilts. I was expecting Orlando one to tilt way more.
More, yeah.
And obviously there's Acrovopia and Six Flags Over Georgia.
They're the only 2 ever built.
And they're both built right next to Cyclone Wooden Coaster Clubs, which is a little fun fact for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the one in Georgia received different seating after a couple years.
Yeah.
That's a little bit more like sitting down.
Yeah.
So both of those are really, really good. There's something about facing down or standing up, quote unquote, that really makes the drop that much more intense. They're also really heavy drop vehicles, so like the speed at which you fall is significantly faster than some of the lighter ones.
Yeah.
For example, Lex Luthor at Six Flags Magic Mountain, or for those who love Zumanjaro, similar, but we chose Lex Luthor because of its swaying of the tower, because Superman sways.
Lex Luthor. And come on, the view is so much better.
But that vehicle is a lot lighter, so the drop definitely feels longer. Really enjoy Lex Luthor too, and mostly because if you hit it right as Superman goes on that tower, your drop is like this S drop. You're just like swerving down. It's a lot more out of control than some of the other Intamin towers. Of course, there's the Canton Tower in Guangzhou in the Guangdong province of China, in the south of China. That is a super tall skyscraper, the tallest freestanding observation tower in the world, if I'm not mistaken. And that has, on the top antenna, has a drop ride attached to it, another Intamin.
Intamin 2nd gen.
Drop itself isn't very tall, but the views are just absolutely amazing. That's the highest open air experience you're ever going to be able to experience anywhere in the world. As of right now.
Park ride.
And it's just highest. So incredibly high up. Check out our TikTok. There's a cool video of it kind of highlighting how high up you are. Like you really are in space almost, it feels like. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And then
almost 2,000 feet off the ground when you're at the top there.
And then there's Falcon's Fury here in Busch Gardens, Tampa, which of course does a complete 90-degree face down tilt where you are facing down and then you make down the 300-foot drop. All 4 of these towers or 5 I guess, come to mind when we think of like, well, these are good Intamin drop towers. And I really think Intamin's the king of drop towers.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of drop towers, the OG drop tower experience, which I know we have this in part of the Intamin non-coaster segment for all of you purists, but for us, we still count them as credits. It's the Intamin first generation free falls. Of course, they were contracted through Giovanola, like some of our other classic 80s favorite Intamin attractions. Giovanola and Intamin together partnered up to create seismic thrill ride experiences. The Demon Drop is the one that we're focusing on. We've ridden a few of these, including in Japan and stateside, but Demon Drop is the only one that's left that's still open in the United States. And we did want to provide our kudos for Cedar Fair and Dorney Park for keeping this ride open, relocating it after Cedar Point decided that they wanted to redevelop that space. These are still my favorite drop rides, generally speaking. The vehicles are so heavy, and you can feel it, and it feels like you're just being ripped out of the sky by these giant, clunky elevator cars, and then the 90-degree fall onto your back, and the old pinch brakes. It sounds like a steel trash can flying down a case of concrete stairs.
Don't look sideways when you hit that shallow drop because you'll hurt yourself.
But then also on the tangent of drop tower-esque rides and tower rides, we must talk about the parachute tower drop rides. There were 4 of these built. These were another one of the classic like Six Flags Intamin collaborations, just like the drop towers, rapids rides, etc. The original Legacy Six Flags parks all had these giant, like 180-foot Intamin parachute drop rides. Now,
and of course for a Knott's fam over here, Knott's Berry Farm has the one that turned into the Sky Cabin. Really cool combo tower.
That was the only combo one ever built. That thing was iconic. But yeah, so now Great Adventure and the Tokyo Dome City area are the only remaining instances of these Intamin parachute towers. The Tokyo Dome one is a little bit shorter than the Six Flags ones, but it's the only one left with these stand-up vehicles. It's called the Skyflower. It's really a Tokyo institution. So when we rode that, we just had a great time. I love these rides. I think they still offer a pretty thrilling and special experience. Even like at Great Adventure, I think the parachute tower and Zumanjaro together complement each other nicely. That's really a great park if you love these oddball Intamins.
Now next up is Excalibur, and Infinity Falls and Shipwreck Rapids. So if anyone knows these names, you should at least know some of these. These are the Intamin Rapids rides.
Yes.
Obviously, Intamin has made many different kinds of Rapids rides, including the really big ones from the 80s.
Yeah.
We're not really going to focus on those because they really don't offer that much of an experience except for like going down the rapids and getting wet, but they're really kind of meh, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of highlights, including Excalibur, which is located at Move Park, Germany, opened as the Never Ending Story, a highly themed Rapids ride, like Rapids Ride Dark Ride combo, themed to the famous Warner Brothers franchise, the Never Ending Story, and then it turned into a kind of whatever ride in between, and now they relaunched it in 2018 as Excalibur, The Secrets of the Dark Forest, highly themed dark ride, Rapids Ride combo, which is really nice. Of course, then we have Shipwreck Rapids, similar boat size, located in Seoul, San Diego. Really
underrated.
Really nicely integrated. I think maybe the best integrated water ride I've ever. Best integrated Rapids ride, maybe anywhere, because it really has that giant ship that's also a restaurant that also serves as like the indoor section of the Rapids ride.
Yeah.
You have the whole dining areas, which are located on little islands throughout the Shipwreck Rapids course, and then you have animal exhibits spread throughout, and then on the ride itself you have several animal exhibits including sharks and flamingos and sea turtles, and you go to this like beached ship that's like filled with water, and then there's glass windows and you can see all the animals. Like, it's really, really neat, and the rock work is awesome. It's definitely a super underrated Rapids ride in the grand scheme of things. It's one of the better ones out there. And then, staying on the topic of SeaWorld Orlando's Infinity Falls, while a little bit less heavy on the animal focus, very modern approach to a classic Rapids ride. Kind of has a classic Rapids ride feel here and there, but they kind of take more risk. There's a lot more rapids. There is a lot more speed. And, of course, you have that actual drop in the elevator. Aesthetically pleasing. Really nicely landscaped. It's located on 2 levels of the park, despite it being Orlando, so it's not like a natural level. Really, really cool. And of course, if you think Intamin, you got to think Rapids ride at some point. Yeah. So.
And on the subject of Intamin water rides, of course, the Rapids ride was like the one that started it all. That was one of Intamin's very, very first projects, was building a rapids-based attraction for Six Flags' Astroworld Park. But now we're moving on to flume rides, traditional inline flume attractions from Intamin. Sometimes they kind of bleed into the coaster category of things, but the main Intamin flume that we want to talk about, which we also happen to count as a credit because it's basically a water coaster, is Chiapas at Fantasialand. That has the steepest drop on any water ride, if I'm not mistaken. I love this thing. The restraints aren't the most comfortable thing in the world, but we understand that, like, in this era of flume rides with these incredibly steep drops. You can't just like plop people down in a traditional log like you used to. But yeah, Chiapas is amazing. It's like basically what every amusement park wants is their log flume. If you are at an amusement park and you don't have a log flume and you think like, well, would a log flume still be marketable today in this park? Well, just think of Chiapas basically. And then of course the other like most iconic Intamin flume attraction would be Valhalla, which is being remodeled and reopening in spring of this year, I believe. I had excellent rides on it in 2015. It is like an e-ticket dark ride experience that's also an extremely wet and thrilling Intamin log flume. So we look forward to hearing reviews of Valhalla when it reopens from our ECK chapter of Coaster Kings.
And speaking of good dark rides in Europe, once upon a time, there were 2 Bermuda Triangle Alien Encounter dark rides. Funky, but highly themed, despite it maybe not aging as well. There was one located on the Gold Coast at SeaWorld in Australia, and then there was one located at Moonpark Germany as well. Again, Moonpark Germany was built as Wonder Bros. Movie World with a large Intamin budget. There was just almost only Intamins. And so this was a major dark ride for them, relaunched as Area 51 in 2019?
19, I think?
Yes, so of course, Intamin is also very well known in the dark ride world. We'll go into that in a second. But I also had Perilous Plunge and Hydro.
Yeah, the continuing on the flume tangent from rapids rides to log flumes to like shoot the chute spill water type rides. Another major Intamin development. The Intamin Splashwater Falls type rides yielded things like Bermuda Triangle at Movie Park Germany, big like themed family shoot the chute rapids rides with like lots of themed elements and like backwards portions and stuff, and then they went even further into the like scary, intense roller coaster esque direction with a ride like Perilous Plunge and Hydro. Perilous Plunge, of course, Knott's Berry Farms Intamin Super, I forget what they're called. They had a special name for them, but the iconic and ill-fated, almost vertical shoot the chute ride where once you hit the water, it felt like taking a fire hose straight to the face. They made a lot of adjustments to this ride because this one and Hydro at Oakwood and Wells, both of them threw people out of the boat at different occasions, relatively close to each other. So the rides were full of problems, but they were spectacular and iconic and basically like dive roller coasters that threw you into a lagoon. The one at Oakwood is still open. It's got this like horrible solid steel shoulder harness restraint configuration, but
is it still open? I heard rumors of it being closed forever.
It might be. When we rode it in 2015, it was like still fairly popular, and I think it's, as far as I know, it's still open. Well, I don't know. Are you gonna look it up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll look it up 1 second.
But yeah, these rides were. I just can't believe these things got built. They're like spectacular and horrifying. I don't think they're on Roller Coaster Database. They don't count them as coasters. You'd have to do some detective work on another channel, but these were incredible Intamin rides, and they just were. I think they were a little ahead of their time, and maybe a little too niche. It's kind of amazing to think that Knott's Berry Farm had something like that was like so unbelievably spectacular, but it was definitely in the era of them like competing with Six Flags Magic Mountain and their level of like crazy intense things. But moving on now from water rides, Intamin's dark ride complement is like pretty stellar. Like there's a lot of dark rides that we think of when we think of like standout Orlando-based attractions, but I think one of the most important ones worth talking about would be the E.T. adventure, really at not just Orlando, but in Hollywood and Osaka originally. That's an Intamin classic, like the suspended bicycle dark ride system, really classic, super fun, typical Intamin weirdness, industry changing, kind of limit pushing sort of thing.
It's still open.
It is still open.
Under Drenched, yeah.
Oh yeah, they changed the name to
2011.
Drenched. I can't remember how close that was to the. I guess it had been a while since the incident, but yeah, they rebranded it. And then of course there's the enhanced motion vehicle Intamin dark rides, Indiana Jones Adventure at Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea. There is Dinosaur, of course, at Animal Kingdom, and Sultan's Adventure, the mysterious and rarely discussed fourth EMV dark ride located at Lifu Village in Taiwan. We did a throwback article based on Lifu Village not too long ago. So if you go to Coaster Kings, if you Google Coaster Kings Lifu Village, Leofoo Village, you'll pull up our throwback article about this bizarre and amazing Intamin showcase park that features this rare and unique and very expensive dark ride. And then last and not least
is Efteling's Fata Morgana, which is a towboat system dark ride. It's very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, but Pirates of Arabia. 1001 Arabian Nights. So a great thing about this is a heavily animatronic-based dark ride. But the nice thing about the Intamin towboats is that the boats always were equidistant from each other. So like every scene, you would always be the only boat in the scene. A problem with the flume rides, like, for example, from Pirates of the Caribbean at the Disney parks, minus Shanghai, is that your boats will very frequently bump into other boats and kind of catch up with one another, and there's always plenty of boats in the same scene. But the Fata Morgana system, the towboat system, every boat is attached to a rope that is with a giant motor in the station pulled through the entire dark ride.
It's like a big pulley system underwater.
But the great thing is that means that like I said, every boat is equidistant from each other, so you'll always be the sole boat in every scene, and there's lots of moving doors and stuff because you're able to do that. And which really makes this ride one of the more unique dark rides in that regard.
Totally.
High capacity, but very very much more a little more immersive, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move on to coasters.
So in transitioning from Intamin's amazing complement of non-coaster attractions into their coaster technology, really from the get-go, Intamin was building everything else before they were building coasters. But in the mid-'80s, especially with their subcontract agreement with Giovanola, they made a seismic development in the industry with Six Flags Great America's Z-Force, the Intamin Space Diver. I rode it as flashback at Six Flags Magic Mountain. I was 6 years old. I loved it. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Most people hated it because it would totally box your ears and give you a concussion. But as terrible as this ride was for a lot of people who rode it, the significance of this ride's development cannot be understated in the overall timeline of roller coaster technology, because this was the first roller coaster to include a 4-cross seating configuration, that boxy cubicle spine type system that would later be ubiquitous with B&M rides. I mean, that ride system, the track bed hasn't really changed much in the last over 30 years since this ride was developed, and it's everywhere. Every B&M coaster that you see, every B&M coaster in the world has flashback at Magic Mountain as its common ancestor. The development of this ride system that is still an industry-leading system of ride manufacturing to this day. So that's one we really wanted to talk about and start with, even though it wasn't a lot of people's favorite.
And for those who are like, oh, Z-Force, question mark, flashback at Six Flags Magic Mountain is what we're talking about. The Intamin Space Diver.
Yeah.
And next we have Balder.
The Intamin prefab wooden coasters are, of course, like, I think a lot of people's favorite. Most people who've ridden El Toro, I think, would say that it's among their favorite wooden coasters. If you've ridden Balder at Leesburg, that is just a fabulous, airtime-laden little layer cake of delight. Choosing between the two is really hard because they're such different rides. I haven't ridden Balder in 10 years, so I'd really need to go back and ride it again. But based on what I've heard from recent ride experiences from that ride, it's held up incredibly well. But El Toro is one that we've definitely, the both of us, have had like a little bit more experience with personally.
So yeah, it's kind of wild to think in 2006, in my opinion, far before the GCI boom, there were really modern, comfortable, high-speed wooden coasters around. Of course, the Intamin prefab, everyone knows it. El Toro is, of course, one of our absolute favorites. The length of the train, and then having those, the first drop, especially sitting in the back, getting whipped over.
Crazy bucking.
There are several really impressive movements on that ride. They're really are better than anything else in the wooden coaster world. And then there's a couple moments that are whatever to me. But generally speaking, El Toro definitely belongs in our list of favorite Intamin.
I think these Intamin prefabs really whet everyone's appetite for like RMC type rides, that like outrageous rocketing out of your seat, like steel coaster level engineering with like a wooden coaster vibe and aesthetic. So I think even though the Intamin ones were expensive to the point where only 4 were built because they were kind of cost prohibitive, they're really iconic. Yeah.
T-Express is like half El Toro, half Boulder.
Yeah.
The first half is complete El Toro.
Totally.
Second half is complete Boulder.
Yeah.
Very long.
It's got that high-speed figure eight, like in the dirt after the Camelback Hill, and then you go up into the mid-course, and then it's Boulder.
Yeah, so
amazing.
funny.
So we now, let's go back to Efteling to talk about the late, great Bob, which was unironically my favorite roller coaster at Efteling until it was demolished at the end of 2019, I believe. The Intamin Swiss Bob coasters were, like Flashback and some of the other non-coaster developments we've talked about on this podcast already, were another Giovanola partnership. I just thought the Intamin Swiss Bobs were so fun and unique, and obviously they haven't aged super well. They're kind of disappearing to the point where I think we only have a couple left. Six Flags Over Texas you can still enjoy to this day. The Great Escape has one, although I don't often hear of people being able to ride it. But Bob was the best. It was custom. The trees had grown in so beautifully. I think Max and Moritz is like a great replacement for it, and definitely a much higher capacity use of that space because Bob's capacity was terrible. But it was a unique, special, classic Intamin roller coaster experience that will forever live on fondly in my memory. Continuing with some oddball European Intamin stuff, we're going to jump over to Paris to talk about one of my favorite guilty pleasure coasters, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril, which that was one of Intamin's first projects with Disney. It was definitely their first coaster, and it was such a funny ride in the sense that, like, Paris needed a coaster really quickly, something with a loop, something that was thrilling, and somehow they got the idea in their head to take the Pinfari looping coaster production model and then asked Intamin to like build a version of it for them, and it worked. It was ultimately very successful, and this goofy little ride that was meant to be like a temporary supplement for the struggling Disneyland Paris resort project has become a cult classic and a favorite of many of all ages, and would lead to other Intamin looping coasters throughout the Disney chain.
Of course, the most infamous one is the late California Screamin', now Incredicoaster. Unfortunately, they definitely went from being like one of our favorites to kind of being like, okay,
we rode that
we like the layout
all the time.
Don't love it anymore because we really can't stand the soundtrack, and also it's just seems after they reinstalled the launch system, it seems to be a little more problematic than before. However, Incredicoaster at Disney's California Adventure at the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim. Phenomenal when it comes to layout, very long, still the longest coaster in the world to feature an inversion, using an LSM system to have your first mode of propulsion being a launch, and then the second being a LAM powered lift hill, which is really unique.
The ride was super ahead of its time.
Great drops, great pacing, lots of just big turns, lots of use of speed, and then the loop itself is a little wonky because they didn't want it to be too supported. They wanted it to really be kind of like a minimalist so they could focus on the giant backdrop that they built behind it.
Ruined the vibe.
So they have reinstalled that loop several times. It is like by far, it's the only shaky part of the ride. It's like the Intamin rattle moment that you inevitably must have. And of course, it finishes off with a bunch of little bunny hops, providing actual decent air. So overall, really, really good Intamin coaster. Has the unique trains that only lasted for like 2 coasters, which were the trains that are also seen on Jubilee Odyssey. No, what is it called? The one
Jubilee
in Malaysia.
Odyssey.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
the one in Malaysia.
Sorry, Supersonic Odyssey.
Supersonic Odyssey.
Jubilee Odyssey is the custom Intamin.
SLC, you mean, of Vekoma?
The custom Vekoma. Oh my gosh. Struggling.
Wow, right?
Yeah.
So yes, also seen in Malaysia on Supersonic Odyssey.
But those trains are basically like Cop Car Chase and Indiana Jones.
But full-length versions.
But like full-length versions.
Yeah, which is
and the
cool.
original Intamin 8-looper in Central America had those same trains too.
Oh,
before they moved on to the Colossus Thorpe Park style.
I don't know why they ever went away from it, because the Colossus or the 10 inversion coaster in Chalong Paradise.
We weren't even going to talk about 10 inversion coaster because we weren't crazy about it. But it was a thing that happened, and so now we're talking about it.
But I mean, mentioning Guangzhou, let's go to Guangzhou Scenic Land again, South China. You may know this really bright green and bright red racing roller coaster. One is an invert, one is a sit down, dueling dragons. It seemed like a fever dream when they were constructing it, and we were actually in the region, and we were like, we're going to hit this right up, let's hit it. Obviously, China operations, one side was down, we waited all day, never opened. Yeah. So we only rode the sit-down version. However, the rumor has it sit-down is the better version. It's pretty much like an Intamin Blitz, which is no longer an official word that they use, but instead of it being just like a straight takeoff. It's a swing launch. So you leave the station, full circuit shuttle coaster. You have a vertical spike of about like 150 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken.
That was actually a highlight of the ride for me.
And then you launch forward again through the giant loop, and then there's a dive loop. And there's lots of really interesting elements that we've never seen before, including like a corkscrew that becomes like an inline roll. And there's all sorts of different like elements and tunnels, and it's a very, very fascinating ride because it doesn't feel like anything Intamin has ever done before or since. You know, Intamin has lots of variety, but when you look at the product lines, kind of like Tagon, Steel Dolphin, Velocicoaster, we'll talk about those, they usually kind of feel very similar. This one felt very different, not only because it had the swing launch, which there's only a few of them. There's another one in China we'll hopefully ride in 2023. But also just because the elements, the way they interacted with the two tracks and the elements they created, they were very, very unique. Definitely a highlight for us. I can't wait to go back and hopefully ride the green side.
Right.
Speaking of China, we also have Steel Dolphin, located in Shanghai Haichang Ocean Park, located in the Pudong region, or the Pudong district of Shanghai, so not too far from Disney in the airport. Great roller coaster. Definitely like a half family coaster, half high thrill. There are some moments, like the launch in the beginning is very good. There's a really good top hat with some crazy air. But then there's, for example, a giant hill over the river that really doesn't do anything.
Yeah. It's got that off-axis airtime hill that festoons the entrance of the park.
Exactly. And then you do like a little loop around the entrance plaza.
Yeah. Decent little underground tunnel.
Decent forces, but nothing crazy. Then you have another launch over, which goes over the river back to the other side of the park. That leads into a couple of really intense airtime moments and some really quick transitions before hitting the brakes.
A little water splash.
This is one of those rides that really kind of just like circumnavigates the park while it's doing its thing, almost like a lower to the ground Storm Runner, except for no inversions. But highly entertaining, very good ride. For a second, when we rode it, I was like, "Oh, this is my favorite" because it was so different.
Yeah.
Because it was so sprawling, so spread out. I think it crossed over itself literally once. I guess twice because you had that one helix in the opening plaza, and then once you have to cross over. Yeah, so like you really only cross over yourself twice, and so that's really kind of unique for Intamin.
Before Velocicoaster, it was my favorite Intamin multi-launch.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of dive into the even more modern versions of launch coasters. Now, of course, Intamin has a wide variety of launch coasters that are our favorites. But before we get there, we're actually going to jump to Europe and talk about the age of the hypers, back when everyone kind of
post Y2K.
Yeah, the late 2000, like the late 1990s, and started this fascination with hypercoasters. And Intamin was like all on it, early 2000s,
all about it.
And of course we have Goliath at Walibi Holland, added in 2002 by
Badass
Six Flags
icon.
Not even that tall. We call it a mini hyper because by American standards, looking at 200 feet, it wouldn't be a hypercoaster. But those labels,
style.
I don't vibe with those labels because it's definitely a hypercoaster because it isn't as tall. It feels and rides like a hypercoaster. Very intense airtime moments. A great first drop. Great unique Stengel dive. There's only two of them now, if you count the one on Skybrush. And of course, it has iconic helices, one over the water, and then the triple finale with the triple hills, and then a quick S-turn, half helix back towards the final brake run. One of my favorite Intamins. It feels very classic, but it has a lot more kick to it than rides like Millennium Force, for example.
Really well, yeah. Another one which we hear hasn't aged quite as well, although we'll reserve our applause or tomatoes for when we ride it again ourselves. Expedition G-Force at Plopsa Holiday Park in Germany. This ride, when it opened, was like the ultimate roller coaster experience, I feel. People talked about this ride for years. I don't hear about it as much now.
It was a big deal. I think Roller Coaster Tycoon 3.
That ride was... I mean, I really enjoyed my rides on it. I thought it was awesome. I look forward to riding it again. That first drop, I still think is like its bread and butter movement. The middle of the ride, isn't like super eventful, but it starts off strong, it finishes strong with that 4 airtime hill finale. And really only like Conda, I think, has a drop that's like akin that like crazy 90-degree turn, 90-degree steepness. Drop experience, but like a great ride worth mentioning, and look forward to riding it again someday. Hopefully we get some good rides on it there in the future.
I mean, speak of like vertical drops and spiraling
experiences. Yeah, we'll talk more about the non-looping airtime Intamin machines more as we continue. But now we're going to take a talk at the Intamin Impulse coasters. These funky, iconic, early generation multi-launch inverted shuttle coasters. Like, honestly, they were way ahead of their time, and I think that's why the ones that
They're
are
so expensive to upright. It's funny how expensive.
Is it like
versus the
$5,000
right
per dispatch?
I think it's like
stupid?
$2,000 or something. Yeah, it's still it's a lot of money.
Of course, the one that we talk about the most, I think, is the one at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, because it was so infamously built against the ordinances of the city of Vallejo, California. So they had to lop off the back spike a little bit, and they took the forward twist spike and made it into a upside down.
Pretty much, they had to rebuild the whole ride because the track for the forward spike was completely custom manufactured.
There will never be a more epic fail. I mean, I guess there are some.
The amount of steel needed for like that forward twist and then that whole ramp was literally like the price of 2 impulse coasters.
It was hilarious. So that one, now they have a really iconic ride, and we thought they were going to chop it because it's so inconsistent, but they actually doubled down on it and made it into the Flash, and I hope that, I look forward to more rides on that in the future. I think that's a pretty special ride for Discovery Kingdom. Wicked Twister, rest its soul, that was one of our favorites at Cedar Point. We loved that ride. We got such a great ride on it. Your first ride on it when we like rode.
Yeah, I really liked Wicked Twister.
We sat in like row 17 or something, and like the backward spike on that thing was just crazy. Now we have to go to, what is it, Sunac?
Chongqing Sunac Land.
Sunac Land, right?
Which is kind of cool because...
Double Twin Dragon.
With the modern age comes modern engineering. So what Intamin did is, instead of having the spirals being like the same radiance of turning at the same time,
they get tighter
the higher you go up, because the less speed you have going higher, the tighter the turn gets, so like your twisting is at the same speed. Very, very interesting how they designed it. It's definitely a very modern approach to it, but I really hope it's successful.
It's Wicked Twister yellow. It's a nice little homage in my mind, and it has lap bars, which I think is a cool development for that ride. But yeah, I think the impulse coasters are killer. There's one more Intamin launched invert we're going to talk about a little bit later. But next, we're going over to Universal Studios Orlando.
That's not a thing. Universal Orlando Resort.
Yeah, that's right. My bad.
So, of course, then there's Intamin back on its like dark ride shit. And that is a good example here is, of course, the two infamous Intamins that are Harry Potter themed at the Universal Orlando Resort. I'm going to talk about Haggard real quick. First of all, it's the most launches any roller coaster in the world. Very technologically advanced. We really love that ride. Because, of course, it has 7 launches, but it has moving track pieces, it has switch tracks, it has, spoiler, I mean, at this point you better know, drop tracks. It has a lot going on.
It's like a family
and then it's really highly themed.
It's like so many different product lines in once. It's a dark ride story coaster, family drop coaster like 13 at Alton Towers. It's a family motorbike coaster like Jet Rescue. It's all of these things in one.
And really nicely balanced with show scenes. Of course, Hagrid's all the hype, and everyone's heard about it. Loves the ride.
Yeah.
But it really is an astonishing feat the way they can move. I think it's 10 trains at once, maybe 9, through the tracks, 7 launches, while also having moving track pieces, and the trains don't stop. So it's really, really unique. Very, very expensive. I think the total project was $300 million.
Yeah.
So it's very expensive.
Yeah, it's the most expensive roller coaster project ever.
But super, super neat. So obviously that's one of our favorites. Love
then there's
ride.
The other Intamin Harry Potter coaster, which when Escape from Gringotts opened in like Diagon Alley at Universal Studios Florida, like that was a huge, huge thing. It was so well loved, and people were so hungry for more Harry Potter, and I think Diagon Alley as an area has aged really well, and I think it still remains like the better looking and more immersive of the 2 Harry Potter areas in Florida. Escape from Gringotts doesn't feel quite as spectacular and substantial, I think, as it did when it opened. I think Forbidden Journey has aged really well and is still like that bitch, whereas Escape from Gringotts, when I ride it, I feel like, okay, it's a little shorter than I remember. There's no animatronic scenes or anything in the ride. It's all just screens and stuff, but it's a well done ride. It's got some great quirks in it. The tilt drop, of course, which was actually done by Vekoma. Universal employed Intamin to do a majority of this ride, but like I believe Premier worked on the trains. They were kind of based on the train setup for the Mummy, and then Vekoma did the tilt drop. But by and large, it's an Intamin product. It's very akin to some of Intamin's dark ride. A track almost like a roller coaster version of the enhanced motion vehicle dark ride experience, but it's still a really fun, great ride in its own right. Very well polished, like a very very keen and crisp.
This is kind of what I
3D
sometimes
ride
refer to
experience.
as, you know how B&M has the wider, bigger track for a dive coaster? This is like Intamin's wide, big track coaster because it has a really wide,
very
classic
wide
Intamin triangle track. You know, it's funny.
It's probably the best one to start with. I think if you're going to Universal Studios Florida or Universal Orlando Resort, you start in Diagon Alley, start with Gringotts, and then take the train to Hogwarts and do the other, maybe more spectacular Harry Potter rides, particularly Hagrid's. But on the subject of that, we've got...
Well, next, I think we should move over to the what I call the Mega Multi-Launchers from Intamin.
Yeah.
So the greatest example we can give here is All Speeds in Chengdu, and of course, better known, the original Taron at Phantasialand in Brühl, Germany. Taron, we like the ride. I will say I don't love the ride.
We were crazy about that ride, and then Velocicoaster ruined it for us.
So Taron has the theming and the world building assets where you're really within these volcanic rockwork thingies, whatever it's actually called. High speed, really good pacing, but again the elements are all very lateral and like airtime focused, which isn't a bad thing, but it's all kind of a repetition. But then there's of course Velocicoaster.
Velocicoaster, back to Universal again. It's like, I think Universal Orlando Resort is just like continuing to knock it out of the park with these Intamin projects, because Velocicoaster is just a victory lap after the seismic impact of Hagrid. Velocicoaster is just perfect. I just wouldn't change anything about it. It's got it all.
We have a whole episode on it.
Yeah,
it's called Let's Go Intamin Velocicoaster, so you have to check that out.
And our Crystal Crown Awards, like we awarded it I think a pretty prestigious award. One that seems pretty broad, but the more we thought about it, the more we're like, no, this ride deserves it. There's a lot of competition in this category, but like Velocicoaster deserves it. So yeah, make sure you check out our Crystal Crown Award article and listen to the Crystal Crown podcast if you haven't.
Episode 47.
If you want some serious Velocicoaster gushing. I think from here, let's talk a little bit more about the regional
super
park.
Intense. Okay, so
regional park Intamin juggernauts.
When you think of best Intamins, or when you think of like favorite Intamins, not necessarily these people's favorites because they're so intense, but I think everyone always has a couple that come to mind, and those are Intimidator 305 and Skyrush. I'm going to kind of talk about them together because they are their own little mini generation of Intamin being like, hey, let's reinvent the wheel. And we know how Intamin's been doing that since the beginning of Intamin. When they are reinventing the wheel, they're making it super intense and pushing the envelope. And with Intimidator 305, obviously, riddled with problems upon opening. Needed to have brakes installed on the first drop.
New train,
the whole helix at the bottom of the first drop was turned into a ramp into the next element. Like it was
water
all
sprinklers on the brake run.
Definitely turned into a situation where the ride pushed too many limits too quickly, but that's just the Intamin thing to do.
We love Intamin.
But yes, I-305, absolutely spectacular, super intense, one of my favorites. That's one of those rides where I will legit gray out and be gray out for like 30 seconds, like if I ride it too many times in a row. They will make you go around after two rides because it's that intense.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything since ever again. Super, super intense. But what comes close though is Skyrush, which only Skyrush will throw you over a 200-foot lift hill at a high speed. It's almost like a launch lift hill, and then right after that have a really sharp turn at the bottom of the drop, and then straight into a 100-feet airtime hill, meaning that like the speed at which you navigate this airtime hill is so intense, so
El
fast.
Toro level violence.
But you are flying at the seat. That entire ride is out of control. The wing seats are absolutely insane. It is so incredibly intense. I think that's why I like it. It's one of the few rides that still kind of scares me. I-305.
It's a scary ride.
And particularly Skyrush scared me. I get to the top of those lift hills and I'm like, okay, fuck. Like, sorry for my language. Like, shit's gonna happen. Like,
Skyrush is, for me, when I first saw Skyrush, I'm like, it's an Intamin Megalight, which we're not really talking about those that much because we think they're overrated. But it's an Intamin Megalight, and I-305 had a baby. And gave it little wing seats, and that ride.
I remember when the promos came out for so no limits edit with these trains. I was like, whatever.
We're like, okay.
But it really is one of Intamin's best products. I know that people complain about the restraints. That was definitely like a one-off restraint system. They don't bother me as much.
Yeah.
But overall, Skyrush and I-305, when we have a conversation about our favorite Intamins, those always come up.
I think those
right
are the favorite of American-based Intamin favorites. I think not Velocicoaster. I think is the first coaster we've seen.
I think Velocicoaster is the third. Since then, they were like, wow, this is really that
not
cool.
Not since Skyrush have we seen something so unilaterally beloved by so many people. But speaking of well-loved Intamin launch coasters and things that really push the limits, of course we have to talk about the Intamin Strata coasters. We have to talk about Top Thrill Dragster and King Ka. We love these rides. We actually are in the I think the minority here when we say that
Camp King Ka.
We prefer King Ka for a couple of reasons that are kind of unique to us. We actually prefer the rolling stock on King Ka. Not because we would rather have shoulder harnesses than lap bars, because we wouldn't, but because there's
more
room.
leg room.
Yeah.
Because like the shoulder harness obviously doesn't take up anything but by the
on
feet.
The floor.
But the floors of the Intamin accelerator coasters that use the lap bars, accelerator or Top Thrill Dragster, for example, there's almost like no place to put your feet, and there's actually one row on Top Thrill Dragster, front row.
Yeah,
I cannot fit.
You can't even fit.
I cannot get in because my feet are too big.
So like if we want front row rides on these things, like we have to ride King Ka, and I think King Ka's launch is more spectacular.
Even though it's only a few feet taller, it needs so much more speed to crest that hill, and the trains are heavier.
Yeah,
that
they are heavier. They hold more people.
The speed is significantly more noticeable. I feel like Top Thrill Dragster's launch feels very insignificant compared to King Ka. And we've had the privilege of riding both in the same week because we kind of are like that. We're
and
like,
that was your first time riding both
one.
of them. So you rode King Ka for the first time, and then a week later you rode Dragster for the first time. And even though I had already ridden both coasters, riding them a week apart and riding King Ka and then turning around and riding Dragster, I was like, oh, okay. When you ride Dragster after King Ka, I feel like the big camelback hump with the brake run on King Ka is also noticeably absent.
Here's the thing. When your ride is literally just a launch and then like a big top hat and a brake run, having an extra element is like suddenly twice the amount of elements.
You get it feels like you have
you got twice the coaster, even though it's like really not that much extra. But it really does add.
Yeah,
like,
more importantly, like we love both of these rides. They're super badass punk rock. We hope that Top Thrill Dragster opens some point in 2022. We know that it's still under investigation by the state of Ohio. There's a lot of things that are probably going to happen before before Dragster once again graces audiences with its presence. So we hope for the best. We wish Cedar Point well in that endeavor. And speaking of Cedar Point, we of course, when talking about Intamins, when talking about the record breaker icon, badass punk rock experiences, Millennium Force maybe isn't punk rock. Maybe it's more like soft rock.
Also, it didn't used to be your favorite, but it definitely grown on me.
It's grown on. Now that Millennium Force is 20 years old, I feel
it has like character.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I enjoy the quirkiness and the Millennium Force-ness of Millennium Force.
The forcelessness.
More like forcelessness. The things about Millennium Force that used to bother me, now I kind of just take them for what they are.
Well, yeah, because now it's just like a mind turn in the sky.
Now it's just like goofy, like quirks that I'm like, oh, that's just so Millennium Force. It's easier for me to appreciate the ride for what it is, whereas before I felt so distracted by
Though I do want to take a moment real
untapped
quick
potential
and bump in here and throw in a Giovanola comparison. Is it like people still love to hate on Goliath and Titan?
Yeah,
because and they come from the exact same time period as Millennium Force. Everyone's trying to push the limits, and like nobody knew what a hypercoaster was going to be yet because they were still being invented, and so. I'm just always amazed that Millennium Force gets so much love for being not really that great of a hypercoaster.
Yeah, and then
Giga, whatever. But then Goliath, everyone gets hate. Like, but Goliath has way more force, and I feel like Goliath really beats me up a lot more than Millennium does.
I'm really glad you brought up Giovanola in general, because I think when having an intimate episode, it's important to talk about the Giovanola trio. Were the only three coasters that Giovanola completely designed and manufactured themselves independently of Intamin's design firm. But yeah, people have a lot of audacity. You got a lot of nerve saying that Millennium Force is like all that in a bag of chips, and then talking about like, well, Goliath doesn't have any airtime. Bitch, Millennium Force doesn't have that much airtime either. Like,
yeah, they both have really good airtime on First Drop, but I feel like Millennium Force is a little more meandering.
Both rides have like
Goliath,
two great airtime moments, and that's really all you need.
Goliath,
like,
that's Positive G's, is one of the best coasters in the world. Also, Goliath
runs like it opened yesterday.
Yeah, for real.
Whereas Millennium Force, runs like a 20-year-old Intamin. It's got that rattle, but it's whatever. It's whatever.
I mean, talking about Millennium Force and kind of like an old 8-inch-man.
Gotta talk about Japan Millennium Force.
We gotta talk about Mid-Tokyo.
Tokyo Millennium Force.
Thunder Dolphin, located on the rooftops of the Lakwa Mall and right next to Tokyo Dome City. Yep. And this park is really interesting with this lock flume and its parachute drop tower.
Like that's another great Intamin flume. The Pocari Sweat flume.
Yeah, Pocari Sweat. Yeah, that's a sports drink, by the way. Thunder Dolphin kind of has Millennium Force-ishness, where like it doesn't really have a lot of force, but it's all about kind of like scale.
Not a lot of airtime, but yeah, it's about
so like it has a really solid first drop,
and
then it kind of just climbs all the way to the top of the roof of the mall, and it kind of just moves around. It has another drop,
nice
and
dive,
it gets lots of meandering.
Fred's the Ferris wheel, the hubless Intamin Ferris wheel.
But overall, a very pleasant ride, almost like Millennium, because there is definitely some character, and it definitely does a lot of like meandering, but it's pleasant. Like there's a couple of good moments and a couple of moments where you're like, you're just kind of enjoying the pacing.
I like it a little more
enjoyed that.
than Millennium Force because the location
Oh, it's
is
definitely
so
more
stunning.
unique, being in the middle of Tokyo.
So spectacular. It's got that
Yeah.
amazing superstructure that's based on suspension bridge technology because the ride had to have like a really narrow footprint to not extend out over property that La Croix didn't own or like roads and like metro infrastructure and stuff. So the ride has like this super narrow footprint that uses suspension bridge buttressing.
Really
so it's
unique.
a really cool
check
ride.
it. We got some pictures
Yeah.
all over our social media.
Yeah.
You can really kind of
That's
figure it
the
out.
earthquake proof, So that was actually one of the most expensive.
Also, there
roller
just
coasters
wasn't a
ever
whole lot of
built
space to
at the
put
time.
supporting. Because
But yeah, like if
over
you
a
love
mall.
Millennium Force, if you like Millennium Force, if that's a ride for you, you got to go to Japan and ride Thunder Dolphin because you will really love that ride. We're staying on some Cedar Point shit for a minute because, of course, now the last Intamin that we haven't talked about yet for Cedar Point that's actually still open is Maverick. We love Maverick.
We love Maverick.
We like to say that Maverick is Cedar
Maverick
Point's...
was really revolutionary.
Maverick, I think, is Cedar Point's only perfect ride. Would you agree?
I like Gatekeeper a lot too.
I guess, yeah, Gatekeeper...
And I like Rougarou a lot too.
I wouldn't change anything
Because
about
Rougarou,
those.
like on a classic 90s like looper boom scale, it's actually really good.
I've ridden over a dozen
Rougarou.
B&M floorless coasters, and Rougarou is my favorite. Sorry, not sorry.
But yeah, I guess.
But anyway,
it's
Maverick is like
story.
the perfect. I think it's like Cedar Point's one true, like 10 out of 10, like truly flawless, spectacular coasters.
Maverick's really good.
Even though
Yeah.
I like love Magnum, like
I can fly and drive all the way. Like I can fly out to the beach and drive all the way to Cedar Point and only have Maverick and be very satisfied on my way out.
yeah.
Which I think we had the ones against the stupid
Yeah.
rainstorm rolled in and we're like, okay, well, nigga,
We rode Magnum, Maverick, the Mine Train, and Steel Vengeance, and then bailed because of the weather. And we're like, all right, we're good. And like because we're Florida Coaster Kings, we have to talk about a little bit Cheetah Hunt, which is probably nobody's favorite if they've ridden Maverick, but we love Cheetah Hunt. It's a great ride in its own right, and more importantly, it's been a huge hit for Busch Gardens. The ride's 10 years old now. It just reopened from refurbishment. It got repainted. It looks awesome. We haven't ridden it yet since it reopened because the lines have been like 2 hours. But
in a way, I feel like it's the most Busch Gardens Tampa ride ever, despite it being quite new.
Yeah, so shout out to that ride.
Big shout out to our next ride, which is the Mine Train at Happy Valley, Shanghai. A unique, but one of two Intamin mine trains. There's one, what's the name of it again?
Mine Train Elvin.
That's the one. Phenomenal when it comes to its pacing. So pretty much what this mine train does is it has pretty decent rock work actually, and then it's in the Wild West themed. You will go up a decently steep lift hill.
Tire drives.
And then this is followed by a twisting kind of like S-turn drop into just a variety of helices and figure eights. It's really fast paced. Really different approach to a mine train. I almost wouldn't call it a mine train. I was like, God, I guess I don't know what else to call it. But this is really, really good ride. So best way to describe this is to look up on YouTube or something. The mine train at Happy Valley, Shanghai, or go to our article on the Coaster Kings. Just search Coaster Kings Happy Valley, Shanghai, and you'll find pictures from above because we have lots of pictures of the ride from above. You can kind of see the layout. Really, really cool.
From
really
the
fun ride.
Flying Island that they have there.
No, there's Vekoma.
Oh, there's Vekoma. Oh, yeah, that's right.
But yeah, definitely one. I think my favorite ride at that park.
Yeah. And now we're gonna go back stateside for a bit. We talked about like Europe's mega coaster fascination with like Expedition G-Force and Goliath, but we have to talk about the original Intamin mega coaster. The original Intamin hypercoaster of all places was at Darien Lake. The original Superman Ride of Steel was the first of that now ubiquitous product line. All three of the Superman hypers for the Premier Parks era Six Flags parks in the Northeast are pretty iconic. I feel like when you ride the one at Darien Lake and the one at Six Flags America, you definitely... And then you ride, like, Goliath, and you think, like, this is... Like, why is this so much less eventful than, like, Goliath, which is admittedly a smaller coaster, but, like, that's progress for you. Still good rides in their own right. The one, of course, that everyone talks about is the one at Six Flags New England, which we feel like... It's such a shame because, like, we love that ride. It has a great layout, but the trains are so dreadful. Like, I just don't even... Like, the trains are... so uncomfortable for both of us. It's like a distraction from the ride, and I just don't even associate positively with it anymore. Especially, and then you go back and ride you go back and ride Goliath at Wally Holland, and you're like, oh my god, this is perfect. Like the trains are perfect, the layout is perfect. Like why did this have to happen to Six Flags New England? I really hold out one day maybe they'll get new trains, like custom new trains, and not like these horrible makeshift Frankenstein trains. But yeah, I guess we'll see. We also need to talk about Intamin stand-up coasters. I've only ridden one, the 7-Up Shockwave at Drayton Manor near Birmingham.
But you did like that, right? Didn't you?
I loved it. It was great. It's the only stand-up coaster with a 0G roll. That's a really amazing highlight. It's fast, squirrely. The vertical loop is almost circular. The first drop is this weird, like it does half the drop and then a sharp, like 90-degree almost bank turn, and then another drop into the loop. And then after the 0G roll, it's got this great, like, Millennium Force style straightaway, like the original, like the one that Millennium Force took the inspiration from. And then a double corkscrew, and then another U-turn into the station. Simple, effective, great ride. I regret not getting on any of the other Intamin stand-ups. This is the only one left now, is the Shockwave. But it's a great ride. I hope Drayton Manor continues to reinvest in that ride, because I think it's a neat asset and a really fun ride.
Next up, we're going to talk about really unique assets and very fun rides. Stormrunner and at Hershey Park. Obviously, very well known, again, for its presence in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, but also for its first kind of Intamin launch coaster that did more than just like a top hat and then like a turn or two in a brake run.
I mean,
this was like revolutionary.
The hydraulic coasters were still in their infancy, so for
the fact that they built kind of like an accelerator kind of coaster, but instead of it having just like a giant figure eight into the brake run, they added a variety of elements on the back end of it, including inversions. So first of all, it has a killer first launch, because hydraulic launch are argues really good.
Yeah.
Then it has a killer set of inversions, including a Immelman
and the unique flying snake dive.
Well, and of course there's a top hat, which is really good, because the top hat starts up higher when it enters it than it goes down it, because it goes down a hill. Yeah. So like actually the drop off the top hat is larger. Of course, then it has the flying snake dive, which is still one of Intamin's craziest elements. Every time I ride it, I'm kind of like, woo! And then, of course, it finishes with that weird banking situation up to the slope brake run. So all around, lots of cool, unique elements on Stormrunner. I think still my second favorite at Hershey after, of course, Skyrush. Hershey is a good Intamin park.
Yeah.
But we're not going to mention Fahrenheit because we don't like Fahrenheit that much. So here's your shout out, Fahrenheit. Child. And then, of course, there is the original accelerator, the Intamin hydraulic launch roller coasters, the ones that, the one that led to Top Thrill Dragster, King Naka, Stormrunner, all the ones we've already mentioned. It all started with accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. Still a phenomenal ride, incredible acceleration. The launch track is really short compared to the later versions, so that launch really has a kick to it. And it's still living for some reason. It was meant to not be living after the 2017 season, I think, when it was down for almost a year. Word on the street was pretty much that it was done and it was going to get replaced with something else. But now it's getting repainted and it's operating again. And it looks like the ride has a couple more years left in its lifespan, so we're excited about that. And in a theme park state that is not that big on the Intamins, I will say that I think Accelerator is definitely the best Intamin in the area. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, this thing flies over the top hat, even though it's 200 feet tall, and you get so much airtime over the top hat. Some of our correspondents, Ian and Pete, were at Knott's Berry Farm just the day after it had reopened from its paint job closure, and this was their first rides on it after years of riding stuff like Top Thrill Dragster, and they definitely agree that Accelerator, even though it's smaller than Top Thrill Dragster, has like the better launch and like is the more thrilling overall ride. So I love that for us. I love that for California. All right, so now before we move on to our last subject, which is also a California classic, we still need to talk about a couple more oddball European Intamins and one that's no longer with us. The full circuit Intamin inverts, I think were a pretty interesting era. It's funny how like the impulse coasters, which are much more unusual, I guess B&M kind of cornered the market, and really Vekoma did too, on like the traditional inverted coasters. So for Intamin, they only built two like standard lift hill full circuit inverts, one of which I rode at Sarkaniemi. It was a good ride, but it wasn't really anything that special. The best parts were the inline rolls, the Volcano the Blast Coaster-esque inline rolls towards the end. But I feel like the pacing of it was a little bit off. It was like a really dramatically banked first drop, but you like crawl over it, so you're kind of just hanging sideways in the harness. I feel like that's what I remember the most about that ride. And then there's Volcano, Rest at Seoul, that was such an interesting, like, unique ride. It was classic Intamin, and when it came out, it just felt like it was light years ahead of the game. Like, you could build a clone of Volcano somewhere at any park, and it could pass for like a state of the art, like modern, crazy thrill ride experience. Was it a little weird, and did it lack some elements? Yeah, sure. It did kind of seem to end like unceremoniously with a pretty large sweeping chandelle drop into the brakes. I always felt like that was kind of abrupt, but it was a unique, interesting ride, and it's a pity that the service life of it ended up being, right at 20 years. And then we have to talk about, with like wonky one-off Intamin launch coasters, we have to talk about Tornado at Bakken, which is Intamin's, for the longest time, their only spinning coaster. Now they have a more straightforward spinning coaster that's being built at Nickelodeon Universe in Chongqing that just uses a more traditional lift style. But Tornado at Bakken had like a little lift hill, and then it would take off into a set of LIMs, or I guess linear synchronous motors, whichever. And that thing was just crazy. It felt like a car crash that lasted for like 30 seconds. I don't even remember the first half of it. Like, once we took off, I like grayed out, and I like kind of came to, and we were still like flying around inside the ride's like gravity building. But that ride is spectacular and terrifying, and still one of the most like intense roller coaster experiences I've ever been on. Probably why there hasn't been any more LSM spinning launch coasters, but a unique, very notable Intamin that I won't soon forget, regardless.
I mean, speaking of Intamins that weren't cloned very frequently, we have the first ever, I guess it's the first ever magnetic launch coaster, which is the Superman the Escape, better known as Superman the Escape from Krypton nowadays, at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Originally it was supposed to be named Velocitron, which I think is a funny name because now we got Velocicoaster and Tron in Orlando. Yeah. But that's a stretch.
That's going to be a podcast episode later. Velocitron.
Yeah. But that's obviously the first Strata coaster. Technically, people that claim it doesn't reach the 400 hype mark all the time are not incorrect, and for that reason, it can still at least hold the Giga title.
It's
if you ask
certainly
me.
The first Giga coaster.
Really, really cool. I've ridden it both forwards and backwards, and not just recently with the forward train having returned, but as in the original, where Superman was standing on top of the tower.
Yeah.
Really, really liked it. The speed is definitely a lot more noticeable when you go forward than it is going backwards. Yes, the launch isn't super intense, but it's just one of those like super large scale rides that doesn't do a whole lot, but it's just large and fast for the sake of being large and fast.
It's just cool.
Back then it was such a limit pushing attraction. Now it's marketed as a family attraction on the park map.
Totally.
And it really is. but I just appreciate the view you get off the ride and the sheer loudness of it. Like, you can hear it through the whole valley. It's just like Superman's just Superman, It's one of those intimate projects that people don't really, and the coast enthusiasts don't talk about a whole lot anymore. But I think when I think of Intamin, I think of some quirky things they've done. And Superman wasn't quirky in the moment, but now it feels very quirky. And I just love that ride. Like, I have a lot of appreciation for it, despite it really not being that much of a thrill ride. But if it's not a long line and it's dark out, it's a great ride to see the valley lit up, or seeing the whole park lit up. Or just during the day. It's just a fun ride. Not much to it, of course. I don't know what else to market about it, but it's a fun ride.
When Sven and Sonder came to visit, that was one of their favorites, if I remember correctly. Sonder really liked that one, just because it wasn't tough on the body, but it was so spectacular and thrilling and just different.
That was my first ever ride at Magic Mountain, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah, my dad was not down. He was scared to ride it. But it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
My parents didn't want to ride either.
It definitely sounds a lot more threatening than it is. Like, with the sheer sound of launch, and then the shrieking of the wheels as it makes its way up the steel tower.
It's an aircraft taking off.
Yeah, it sounds like a jet fighter, but instead of it flying a couple hundred feet over the park, it's flying literally a couple feet over the midway. And with that, we'll end our list of favorite Intamins. Make sure that wherever you're listening, including Spotify now, leave a review, leave a rating. Spotify now allows you to review our podcast as long as you've listened to at least a couple episodes. So give us 5 stars, help us grow. Share our episodes with your friends, family, whoever you want to share this with. Mm-hmm. Of course, if you're on Google or on Amazon or on Pandora, anywhere you're listening, we really appreciate you. If you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. Again, help us grow. We would really appreciate that. And of course, check out our mini-sodes episodes of this year so far. We have 4 already live. We have Blue Fire. Well, we should probably start with the A. Yeah. We start with American Eagle. We got Blue Fire. We got Cop Car Chase, and then we have Dragon and Ocean Park. So definitely check those out. And we will see you online on social media on thecoasterkings.com.
Follow our TikTok.
Follow our TikTok. We're back on that.
Yeah, we're trying to do some more TikTok.
And we will see you on the next episode.
We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.